We have 45 minutes, and I do want to leave some time for question and answer as well for them. So I'm going to try and get right to the questions. The very first question is: findings in several recent studies by the Pew Research Center find that many of us know is a reality. Fewer and fewer people are attending church. Adding to this is the growing number of religious knowns, numbers of people who define themselves as being religious or spiritual, yet do not feel the need to attend a congregation on a regular basis. Why do you believe this shift has happened over the past several decades? And how can the church respond to this reality? I'm going to start off with Pastor Jarrett and work that way, then I'll work back on the next question if that's okay.
Sure. So there sounds like there's a couple questions in there of these findings that folks aren't coming to church, wouldn't associate themselves as religious. And I think it is in step with what we see in our culture. There's a growing lack of trust in organization and organizational leadership, and understandably so. And you have a younger generation now, when you talk millennials, when you talk generation after them, that honestly question most systems of authority, and understandably so. And so with the church getting locked into that paradigm as an organizational structure, it would make sense that folks would say, well, this is just another one of those, and I'm not interested in that. I'm spiritual, but I don't want to be religious. I don't want to be tied to any sort of organized thing like that. And while we have seen that definitely to be true on a national level, we've seen that to be true if you watch what's happened all throughout Europe and the rest of the world, that's already happened. We're just a little behind and catching up to that trend. I think this is a perfect time to come back to what is at the heart of the church, which you can see throughout the book of Acts, is that this is a community, this is a people, this is a movement less than it is some sort of organization. And I think folks are drawn to that authentic community, that self-sacrificing community, that I'm here for you sort of community versus a top-down organizational structure that leads with that. And so for us, that is the challenge, right? Especially as we grow, how do we tuck all the organizational, the unsexy things, if I could, about systems, how do you kind of tuck those into the corner so that it can be healthy and sustained, but not lead with, here's our organizational structure, here's where you fit into the organization, because that doesn't connect to folks anymore at all. So that's my thought.
I think a couple of things. I think, one, we're in a society right now where relationship and commitment are not there. We're so broken, we're so divided, become so self-centered and selfish society, so that commitment to one another and a commitment to anything long-term. People don't work a job for 30 years like they used to. People don't, stay in the communities they grew up in for years and years. So I think we live in this commitment-less society, and I think it's part of it. But I think the other part of it is that church has, it needs to own up to its own failure. I think churches have lost over the last couple of decades their identity. I think they've lost their prophetic voice. I think they've become another institution, another Fortune 500 company, another business. And particularly young people saying, why should I be a part of you? You're not doing nothing. Right. So church has lost it, has forgotten its identity. You go back to civil rights when the church was at the center of civil rights. And now you go 20 years later, church is Pharaoh's, accomplice. And it become another identity of the institution, representing all the works. I mean, look at today, and we see people are trying all the issues that are going on. Where the hell has the church's voice been? It's been absent. It's spiritual laryngitis. It has no identity in forming the conscience of America anymore, or the world. So I think we have to own up that we have lost our identity. You can't ask people to come to something if nothing's going on. We got to get ourselves together. We do stuff, people are going to come. But we're at a crisis, I think, too. And we're at a threshold. We are either going to become totally irrelevant to young people, or we are going to get our identity back and they'll come.
Let me say this too in relation to the churches. Pastor McGinley, particularly Marcus, and even Pastor Jarrett, their churches are pretty good with millennials in the sense of the size of the church. Pastor Pfleger has a cross section, and probably due to the age of the church, but they have a good, but also a very active youth and millennial generation within their churches. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about, and many of the things that have been raised into how do we reach this generation of folk that, as you mentioned, just don't see church as relevant at all. Okay. I'm sorry, Pastor McGinley.
Oh, sure. I think you reach millennials if you get Chance the Rapper to come to your church.
Right.
I do your church. So for me, I guess I'd say I grew up a religious nun. Like my parents were not religious in any way. And so I would say that this kind of trend has been, it's like 1966 when the Is God Dead, cover came out. So this is not a contemporary issue. It's been building up pretty across generations, and that decreasing trust in the church to really do what its kind of advertised stated commitment is versus its actual lived kind of institutional survivalism that it's lived into has really kind of turned people off from this sense of, who are you really here for, right? Are you here for yourself, or are you here for something bigger? And so I would say, kind of for me, I agree with all the things that have already been shared, so I'm not going to repeat them, but there is kind of a macro and a micro reality to the lives that we lead, right? So for me, when I became a Christian, it was in a context of a broken family where there was a lot of domestic violence and a lot of things happening that of emotional fragmentation that I did not understand at the age of 15, like what could life look like other than what I experienced at home. And it was in a church context where I realized that you can do life differently and you can have a different way of structuring who you are and what you are for in the world. And so it started with a kind of personal transformation, but that personal transformation obviously led to a much broader kind of social understanding of what does it mean to be tied to others around me. And so I think for a lot of young folks, and I'm not sure if this is specifically the question now that I'm thinking about it, but I think the shift that has happened is that folks are looking, we are, as Father Pfleger said, living in an increasingly fragmented society, a decreasingly committed community, and how do we become the kind of spaces where we're calling people both to healing but also accountability to one another, because those things go hand in hand. And I actually think, even in my congregation where there are, mostly folks from their 20s and 30s, they both struggle against the demand to be committed to one another, but they also deeply long for it. And so you just have to keep pressing, right? Like, don't be afraid to demand things of people, because actually you will see who can rise to the occasion and who will come alive underneath that.
Yeah, amen.
I thought about this before I even got the question, and I figured it all out. So once I got
Write this down.
write it down, Father Pfleger, all right? What I looked at is, okay, so like I'm fat, right? So I love food. So I can find a revelation in food. And I figured out what happened to the church. We Krispy Kremed ourselves. When Krispy Kreme first, who remembers Krispy Kreme donut, right? When Krispy Kreme first came out, you had to go there, right? And you had to stand in line, and you stood there. Remember, they would give you the little one while you waited, and you you saw them making it, and it was like
the red dot.
Oh my God! It was like I'm at Krispy Kreme. And then what happened was, think about it. When's the last time you had a Krispy Kreme? You haven't had one, and you know why? Because the value dropped, because you can get it anywhere. And what has happened in the church is that the internet is a gift and it's a curse. People still get church, they just don't come to church. So you have to ask yourself, if I had the opportunity to work from home, would I go? And so the internet, as wonderful as it is, people just don't come to church because I can get this anywhere. There are 9 churches on every block. I don't have to travel across town to come to you. If you tick me off this Sunday, I'll go to another church next Sunday. The internet, as much of a blessing as it is, we have to be careful that the internet is an introduction to our church, and it shouldn't inundate the people. It should just be an introduction, and this is what we do. But why come if the entire service is streamed live and at the end I can give? So I know there are a lot of churches that are growing because of it, but I think that if we really take a step back, what we think is really helping us could overall begin hurting us. Because the Bible says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. There's a blessing in coming to the Lord's house on the Lord's day. And so we've got to make sure that as much as we want to reach the masses and get it out there, that we don't Krispy Kreme ourselves. We got to make sure that we keep people coming for what's good. You got to get them through the door. Now our church, I only do snippets on live. I don't put my whole sermon in. Every Sunday I get 5 or 6 people, you should go, can you do the whole sermon? Nope. that was just your Krispy Kreme while you're waiting. So you got to come into the doors, and we've got to continue to come into the doors. The other thing I think is that now there's more competition on Sundays than any other time in the history of there's everything else is going on Sundays. Your kids play ball on Sundays, you're off only on Saturdays and Sundays. So you have all of these other things. I remember growing up, if you didn't go to church on Sunday, you had nobody to play with. Like everybody went to church, right? But now it's there are a million different things to do. And I think as a church, we've got to get back to, as Father Pfleger said, we've got to get back to having something for them to come to.
Okay. All right. Amen. Y'all don't know. Keeping preachers to 2 minutes is a task. It's a task. But they're doing a great job. Amen. All right. Question number 2. And Marcus, I'm going to start with you this time. Pastors are leaving the ministry, and of course, we're not talking about the ones here. But in 2016, a survey of ex-pastors, an organization committed to providing resources and assistance for clergy, found that 77% of pastors experience burnout. 64% are overworked. 86% cannot meet the demands of their jobs. 62% are lonely and fight depression and wrestle with anxiety. 60% do not receive a livable wage. 75% say that their spouses want them to quit their positions in the church. And 63% share if they could provide for their families without serving a church, they would. So here's the question. How do these statistics impact the ability for the churches to serve their communities? And what are practical suggestions and ideas that churches can engage in to deal with that reality? So if I was to rephrase this, I would say, pastors, what are the things that people can do in their church to keep you from being one of these statistics?
It goes to that statistic that says there are 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. And what happens is, as church membership has declined, so has that number of the 20% decline. So there are less people doing more work, which means that there's more work that ends up on pastors' desks. The reality of it is that most churches don't really have a flow chart. So if anything happens right away, my phone is ringing. Right? So not only am I dealing with having to prepare the sermons and going to the hospitals, I'm also dealing with my son didn't come home last night and my wife said she leaving. And so by the time you get done dealing with everything on your plate, you're like, I don't want to do this. I mean, it's like, so there's a big pressure that's put on pastors. Pastors are quitting because people are quitting. And if we could rally our people again, as everyone if we could get our people excited about coming back to the doors, it would take a lot off of our plates.
Pastor McGinley?
All the statistics are real, and I believe them. I think that one of the things is that we live in a sort of consumer culture, right? And so a lot of the expectations around pastors are not all that different than what you would expect from your customer service agent, right? That pastors are expected to be the professional Christian in the congregation, right? As opposed to the congregation being the body of Christians that work together and to do God's work. And so there is a kind of culture shift that has to change, and that you have to teach your congregants that what we do isn't just for me as the person who has the REV before her name, but as someone who is tasked to shepherd folks together and to give people a theological framework, a faith framework for why it is that we do what we do, that is compelling enough to help them catch the vision of what God is trying to enact in this world. And a lot of that you are always going to be trying to prod folks together to help them catch the vision because they've got pressures pressing on them, but to pull them out of the hamster wheel of the lives that they are living in, and to help them really see that they're a part of something so much bigger than what is happening on that day-to-day thing that you have to do in order to live your life, and to draw them in. And I think as pastors, we also have to get over our savior complex too, right? That hey, if people are not joining in the thing that we're trying to get people to do, then don't do it, right? You don't need all the programs. That's kind of how I see it, and because we are the church. I am not the church. So those are a couple of things that come to mind for me.
get over my Savior?
A couple of things come to mind. One is I think that we have to understand that not put ourselves apart from our congregation, but one of them. That we're all in this together. So when you say the Savior comment, we're all struggling, we're all carrying, be transparent about where we are, not to try to pretend that I'm in a different place than my congregation. Many times my congregation is way stronger than I am. And we got to be able to be transparent with that and be honest about that. I think we also got to develop leadership. We got to understand that we're not here to create a church of followers. We're here to create a church of leaders. So that when they walk out of those doors on Sunday, wherever they are, the workplace, the schoolhouse, the marketplace, wherever they are leaders, they're pastors where they are. We have to develop a church of pastors and not just be the pastor and have them be the members. I think we have to, all those statistics I agree with except the spouse one because I don't have a spouse. But I think we also have to realize that this has to be something we really feel called to and have to really love. And believe if I'm called to do this, God's got my back in this. So when I get down and I cry and I get mad and I get depressed and all those things, but at the end of the day, if my relationship is in sync with my God, from the moment when I wake up to when I go to bed, then I'm able to call and lean and depend on Him when I know, I wake up knowing I'm dysfunctional. I wake up knowing I can't handle this. So I walk out in the morning saying, this is on you. You know, you can use a jackass to ride in Jerusalem. You can use this jackass to ride through this day. That's how I operate. You know I can't do this. But we have to feel called it. We also have to I believe it's important in my life at least to have mentors. There are people, there are the Farrakhan's and the Jeremiah Wrights and the Harry Belafontes who I lean on weekly because I need mentors for my life that I can wrestle with, share my heart, cry with, and scream with. I think I need people in my life that I can be me with. And I think not only that with my congregation, they have to see Mike Pfleger, not just Reverend Mike Pfleger. You know, because then they think, oh, well, he can do this, but I can't. No, I'm as screwed up as anybody out here. And if I can do it, surely anybody can do it out here.
Well, a couple thoughts. So much wisdom has already been shared. For me, there are a lot of leaders to look to in the Bible, but for me, when it comes to leading a group of people, look to Moses. And you can see what it's like to try and move a group of people to where they ultimately want to go, but resist going every day. And are seeing miracles literally happen right before them, but forget about God by the end of the day.
Right.
And you see in Moses, I see in Moses, someone who is a reluctant leader, someone who said, I'm just one of you, but God has called me, and so I'm going to do this. He needs help. He has to get Aaron alongside him. He has to get some leaders alongside him. He has to delegate leadership, as we've already talked about here. And still, nevertheless, faces opposition on a daily basis and resistance on a daily basis, discouragement on a daily basis. And I don't think that's part and parcel for being a spiritual leader, for being a pastor, that you have to have all those things. But they're in the mix at some level. Doesn't have to be your sole experience, but that is part of being a leader, is that you're at the tip of the spear. Now, I can talk, like say, Chris, I think the question was, what can everyone else do to help pastors? The reality is, the bulk of this is the pastor or the leader's responsibility. Right. As Father Mike just said, I've been in counseling for 15 years. Not because things got so messed up that I had to go see a counselor. It's because I didn't want them to get so messed up. Exactly. It's preventative maintenance for me. And that's a safe place for me to yell, scream, cuss, whatever, about, bitch and moan and complain about what's going on, because I don't want to bring that out to my people. Yeah. That's my responsibility. It's my responsibility to have a safe space where I can do that. It's my responsibility to remember that when I put my congregation before my calling, everything gets messed up. Yep. And I was called by God first before anyone ever sat in these seats. Wow. And so when I put them and say, well, I have to meet, well, you said you want this, okay, you like that kind of music, what I said last week was too political, and then now I've got everything twisted, and of course that's going to make a mess. It's like when parents put their kids before their marriage. Everything gets out of whack. And so I have to be responsible. So what y'all can do for your pastors is just encourage them and tell them thanks. They would love to get an email, or they would love to hear, great sermon today, or just what a nice tie, or I don't, whatever, anything. that just said, I see you, and I'm grateful for you. Everything else that's my responsibility between me and God. I can't say it's y'all's fault, and I've hit a couple different times walls where I thought, I'm done, I'm out, this is it. I don't want to end up some statistic. I need to get out on good terms. And by God's grace, He's brought me back to the calling He gave me at 19 years old. When I sat on a rock in front of a bunch of middle school students in Northern California, and I heard God for one of the few times in my life say, this is what I've called you to and prepared you for. And so for me, that has to come back. I have to come back to that, come back to that, come back to that, versus letting everything else lead why I get up and do what I do in the morning.